City Council meeting for Tuesday, April 28th, 2020. At this time, I was going to ask to stand for the invocation by Mr. Lupo.
Almighty Creator, please look down upon this gathering and provide your servants with the wisdom to do what is right and just, and to know that each one of us must strive to overcome our faults, as none of us are perfect. Please, Lord, protect this great country and all those who serve her. We ask these things in thy name. Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. At this time, we're going to take a roll call, electronic style, where we'll say how we're appearing.
City Clerk Sally Carey for the roll call. Mayor Scott Tremblay.
Here in person.
Vice Mayor William Dittmer.
Here electronically.
Councilwoman Jenny Sorrell.
Here electronically.
Councilman Tom McClary.
Here electronically.
Councilman Tom Kinsella.
Here in person.
City Attorney James Matthew.
Here in person.
City Manager Vincent Lupo.
Here in person.
Thank you. At this time, I'd like a motion to approve council minutes.
Motion to approve minutes.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We're going to move on to comments from the general public. And it's my understanding we have one person that's signed up that has appeared electronically.
Mr. Mueller?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Mr. Mueller, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, and appreciate you guys taking the time to listen to our concerns, my concerns. In the first place, I'd like to thank you guys for holding the line there and doing the best you can under the circumstances. I think we've got work in process. What I'd like to know is we haven't seen any annual audit report. I'd like to know what a status is on that. There was a bathroom closure at the parks. The parks reopened, the bathrooms are still closed. You really can't have one without the other. I think you ought to give consideration to open the bathrooms if we're going to open the parks. I don't think we're going to have 10 people in a bathroom. As a result of this COVID-19 situation, I think it probably warrants a possibility of an assessment for all of the positions within the city, and this may be an opportunity to right size to make it fit for our budget and for our community. And that would be going through all departments to see that they're adequately staffed, plus or minus. This may be a good opportunity to introspectively go look at all of those positions and deem the ones that are vital and address that. Ultimately, we have in effect a less than or 10 or less gathering scenario and must maintain a 6-foot rule. I believe all the council members and the administration there would be less than 10, and you could potentially have a meeting with 10 people. I would like you to give consideration to that. I also noticed on the website for the city, a police department and a fire department last report was on November of 2019. I thought at one time we discussed having this on a monthly basis published to the web. There hasn't been anything updated since November. The drinking water report, 2019. There's 13 categories of tests in that report. there was only 4 of them performed with a 2019 date. The majority are older than or are in the 2017 vintage.
Mr. Mueller, that was your time, but I want to give you some additional time, an additional minute to close out.
I can't hear what you're saying.
I wanted to give you an additional minute to close out. Your 3 minutes ran out, but I wanted to give you an extra minute to kind of close out what you were saying.
I'm almost done. But anyway, back to the 13 tests. 9 of them have not been performed since 2017. Possibly we need to look at getting that updated. And also that certificate of the test wasn't signed by any agency or authority, so we should have some kind of legitimate test results that are signed by an authoritative agency. And I also noticed that the purchased water in February of this year exceeded that of 2017 per the charts that were published to the website. And I thought we were in a decline in buying water, although this would indicate that we're back on track to buy a lot more water. And maybe it's an issue with the presentation of the chart or something like that, so you might want to go check that out. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Mueller. I appreciate you calling in today.
Appreciate it.
Were there anyone else that had called in, or okay? So at this time, there's no other comments from the general public. There was only Mr. Mueller signed up. I want to move on to comments from our city manager.
I have none, sir.
Okay. At this time, I want to move on comments from the mayor and the city council. I wanted to touch on a couple items that have come up this week. The first one is the auditing committee for the Florida Legislative Branch had sent me a notice and a letter with the intent to audit our city. What was interesting about the letter is it appears that the audit is limited to our CRA only and not to the performance of the rest of the city finances or budgets. So it looks like the audit that's going to be done by the legislative branch, which was the fallout from the legislative meeting. I shouldn't say fallout, that was what the legislative body elected to do, is the purview of that audit is going to be for the CRA funds within the city, and that's the only thing that looks like is going to be subject to the audit. So I wanted to touch base with the public as I received that letter. The other thing I wanted to touch base with is I've received correspondence from the county coming up in the next couple of weeks. It appears that the Restore Act money will be on their agenda. I've been asked to appear electronically for the city, and I'll be working diligently in the next 2 weeks to see if we can secure the funding, hopefully to enhance our waterfront area and continue some of the dredging efforts that we have in the city. That's all I have for general comments. I wanted to pass it to Mr. McClary first.
The only comment I had is I did receive the call log of calls received and sent out from the administration. And I would like to work offline with Jocelyn. You supplied me exactly what I wanted, exactly what I said, but I probably was not clear enough as to the intent. So I will be sending her an example of a call log that may be more beneficial for all of council to just kind of review how our citizens call in and any comments they may have are addressed. So I will work with Jocelyn, sending her an email of an example, and maybe we can kind of dial it in. But I wanted to thank everyone at that time for providing that.
Thank you, Mr. McClary. Is that all you had on the general comment section?
That's all I had on general comments.
All right, I'd like to pass it over to Vice Mayor Dittmer at this time.
I just had a few, one of them you covered, which was going to be related to the Restore Act and the meetings that we had there. And the second one, I believe last time at the last meeting we talked, we were going to have a meeting with the county, Dan Biles, and I wanted to know if we were able to talk about the Nix Park boat ramp and them assisting us in the repairs to the park.
And if I may, I wanted to pass it to Mr. Lupo to give you a response to that inquiry.
Thank you, Councilman Dittmer. We had in my opinion, a rather successful communications meeting, virtual meeting, with both County Administrator Dan Biles and an Assistant County Administrator. We discussed 3 issues. The first one Mayor Scott alluded to, and that one is the virtual appearance on May the 19th concerning the Restore Act. We spoke in depth about what this council wanted to achieve with respect to our Restore Act. We went into detail with the administrator. He requested some additional information, and we supplied him that information. So it was a rather successful meeting with respect to the Restore Act. Subsequently, another conversation was conducted with respect to the underpass project at the bridge at 19. This, as you will recall, is the joint project that involved both our city, the city of Newport Richey, and the county. We had quite a detailed discussion about some of the legalities with respect to property and some of the directions that the county administrator was looking at and potentially utilizing some legislative assistance. The project is voiced at approximately a $4 million project. And then the third issue was the boat ramp at Nix Park. We discussed that in detail. We discussed the utilization of that boat ramp, the necessity for repairs. We talked about our costs, about our grant participation, and about the possible participation by the county. And Mr. Biles assured us he would take it under consideration and hopefully discuss those issues with his board and return to us. I believe it was a positive meeting on all 3 fronts, and we look forward to working with Mr. Biles.
Thank you. Mr. Dittmer, did that answer your inquiry?
It did. I just want to make sure, because with my conversations with Commissioner Wells, he did give me a verbal commitment from his position at the county to participate in that. I want to make sure that we hold them to what he said, because we definitely need the funds.
And just on that note, I'll comment that some of the county commissioners have reached out and talked to me, so I can tell you that I've spoken to I think pretty much every county commissioner except for Ms. Starkey is the only one I haven't spoken to, but I've talked to Mr. Mariano about the issue. I've talked to Commissioner Oakley as well as Commissioner Moore, and I'll follow up with another return phone call to Commissioner Moore before the meeting. So I've spoken to everybody as well. So I just wanted to touch base and let you know what efforts I've been making on that end as well. Did you have anything further, Vice Mayor?
No, that answered my questions. Thank you.
Okay. Councilwoman Sferrell, I wanted to open up any general comments that you may have.
Actually, most of my subjects have been covered already. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilwoman Sferrell. The last person is Tom Kinsella, who's here in person.
A couple things. Y'all can hear me?
I can hear you loud and clear here.
Reimbursement through FEMA, some of the preparations, expenditures. Has the city been moving forward with any?
If I might, yes, sir. We have the 214 forms that we've been filling out. We have Captain Soroy, who's been assigned as our basic coordinator with respect to that. We have reports going to our assistant city manager, and we'll be following forward on all of those expenditures. We are beginning to have a detailed cost analysis and projection of what it actually cost us.
Do we have any roughly idea at this time, anything that maybe?
No, we haven't put anything on totals yet, have we, Jocelyn? No.
More out of curiosity than anything?
Yes. And if I might, Councilman, to our knowledge, no employee has been, thank God, taken ill. And as you stated, it's the basis kind of things that we're adding up, nothing serious.
And Mr. Mayor, I don't know if bring this up, but that audit committee, the letter you received, and they said that they're just narrowing it down to the CRA. Could we as a city ask to go further? Are we allowed to do that, having an audit?
Well, what we've done and what I did at the time of this is I provided all the political figures that were involved in the legislative branch. I made sure they had all the information, including audits, past audits from the city. And what I would recommend potentially talking about in the future is this year, if they're not going to audit us, when we are audited by the state, we do our own audits, that we put those together and send them so they can monitor our progress within the city.
But with the state doing this, I mean, is there a possibility that we could ask the state to continue to go beyond that scope?
If I might, sir, we are not the only city being audited. Quite a few cities are going to be audited. And at this point in time, we've been told, and we're setting this all up now, that it will be a virtual audit and transmission of documents back and forth. But certainly once the process begins and their man-pool allotment changes, we can go further.
Yeah, honestly, I think we should consider that. We've been talking about transparency and having that opportunity to go along with that
Certainly.
Audit committee. And Mr. Lupo, the last meeting I asked the possibility of getting something on the city website where have a designated phone number where people could call. Again, the past 7 days, hearing citizens calling saying that they will leave messages, there's no one answering the phones, they don't know where to go. As recently as Friday, one of the citizens called and left a message and still hasn't heard anything. But my concern is, and has been, I mean, this should have been done early on when this all started, is on our web page, have a number designated where the citizens can call for anything, and everything is funneled through the one number as opposed to trying this number or that number and so forth. And it seems like the frustration our citizens are having because no one answers, or they leave a message and then they still haven't heard anything, they'll call another number. And really that's not fair. And the last meeting you mentioned that you were giving a guidance to the citizens, and I have yet to see that. The web page, the last post on there was April the 15th about explaining to the citizens if they're late in their water bill, don't worry about it, it's not going to be turned off. But that's the last thing on there to tell anything that's going on in our city. And honestly, the biggest complaint I've heard, besides the chief's resignation, is the lack of communication coming from City Hall and the lack of direction. And honestly, I've always felt it was an easy fix, but nothing's been done. So that's a big interest of mine.
If I might, Councilman, we have set up a system here to respond to calls The call log that was presented to Councilman McCleary clearly states the amount of calls that we've received, whether they come in directly on this line, and if this line, for whatever reason, doesn't answer, it immediately rings to one of our phone lines where we answer it. Each one of the employees, there will be an employee, there are employees on each department that will respond to any question that comes in. We were attempting to establish a separate phone number as you had requested. Unfortunately, the individual who does all of that for us, Ms. Tony Hayes, has been taken quite ill. Nothing to do with COVID, but we're working on obtaining a separate single line with respect to COVID issues, and that will be that number will be published on our website. Sir.
That's all I have right now, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Does that conclude our comment section from City Manager and Council? Hearing no further comments, I wanted to move on to the consent agenda, and I wanted to see if there was a motion to approve the agenda. Okay, so we're going to move on to council business. The first item up on council business was a discussion on our police chief. That was requested by Mr. McCleary. I wanted to pass that discussion over to him for any opening comments that he may have.
Thank you very much. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, I can hear you loud and clear over here.
Perfect. Thank you. Mayor and council members, as we had discussed in our last meeting, I had requested statements from Mr. Lupo and Chief DeCanio concerning the events leading up to the resignation of Chief DeCanio. Pursuant to that request, Chief DeCanio provided a statement as to his recollection of the events leading up to the April 15th issuance of the referenced letter. That statement was provided to all of you via email 9 a.m. today in your city email, and I will discuss its contents in a moment. I have not received a statement per se from Mr. Lupo. However, I did receive a confirming email and provided that email as an attachment, again sent at 9 a.m. this morning for all to see. Subsequent to the receipt of the statement from Chief DeCanio, I reached out to former Sergeant Patrick Alou, whom, as you may recall, retired approximately 2 months ago under similar circumstances of an unexpected announcement of retirement with only 2 weeks' notice. I made a request of Mr. Alou, similar to that of Mr. DeCanio, to provide a statement as to the events leading up to his retirement announcement. This statement has been provided to you all as well today via the same email at 9 a.m. this morning. Has everyone of council had an opportunity to review these documents?
I have.
I have.
I have.
I have as well.
I'm going to start with Chief DeCanio's statement and supporting statements of Officer Esposito.
Before we get into that, we need...
Excuse me, Mayor, I have the floor.
What, I understand that, but you still have to follow all the procedures and all the rules that we operate by. And this is set up as a discussion, number one. Number two...
No, Mr. Mayor, I have the floor.
Well, I understand that, but you want to read...
So you are free to speak after I am done.
Sir, you first, before you start that, to get into statements, I don't know if that's appropriate, and if we're going to do that as a council...
Mr. Mayor,
no, stop.
I have the floor.
I understand that.
You yielded the floor to me. I am allowed to speak.
You're allowed to speak, but you're not going to go into all these statements unless the council wants you to. And so what we're going to do is I'm going to ask the rest of the councilmen and women whether or not they want to go down this road and go into all these different statements. I'm going to start with Mr. Dittmer. Mr. Dittmer, have you reviewed everything?
I've heard this. My only concerns is I don't want to feel that we possibly are overstepping bounds in relation to the daily operation of the city. Those are my only concerns. I just wanted to voice those. Thank you.
I will not go into the details of the statement from Officer Esposito.
And let me stop. Councilwoman Farrell, what's your take on this particular discussion and going into all these statements?
Well, it's my personal opinion that council is overstepping their boundaries and not following the charter.
How are we not following the charter, Ms. Sorrell?
Okay, on Article 3, City Manager. The City Manager is the Chief Administrative Office of the city, responsible to the county and the administration of city affairs placed in the manager's charge by or under this charter. Appoint when he deems necessary for the good of the city, suspend or remove the city employees and appoint administrative officers provided by or under this charter, except as otherwise provided by law. This charter or personal rules adopt pursuant to this charter, he may authorize any administrative office who is subject to his direction and supervision to exercise these powers with respect to subordinates in that officer's department and officer's agency. He has the sole right to hire and fire.
He does not have the sole right. First of all, in Section 5...
I'm not going to argue with you, sir. I answered your question.
Okay.
And the other thing is, legislatively speaking, we are not supposed to interfere in the conduct of any department officer or employee in the discharge of his or her duty. It is not in our purview to do such a thing.
And let me just weigh in for a moment. And I think we probably need some kind of legal opinion here. We do have a city attorney here. The question becomes, hypothetically, and I'm going to ask our city attorney this, let's presume that the 5 council members decide that we want to keep Chief DeCanio and we think that he's best for the city or the department, and we decide we're going to vote on that right now. Will that have any legal effect or any binding effect on the city?
Is that the question, Mr.
That's the
Mayor?
question.
It would not. The City of Port Richey is a council/manager form of government. It's one of the major forms of government in the state of Florida. I mean, I can go into it in detail, but our charter is very clear that the hiring, firing, and all employees, including the department heads, are solely under the purview of the city manager. The city council doesn't hire or fire the police chief.
Okay.
Very clear. I mean, I can go in further and start reading you the sections if you want.
So,
And it's the same way all over. I mean,
so from a legal perspective, the only way, and the only person, I should say, that would have the authority to rescind or ask Chief DeCanio to stay or to rescind his retirement would be the city manager position, which would be Vince Lupo in this particular case.
that's correct.
Okay. So I want to direct it, because really the inquiry goes to Mr. Lupo. And Mr. Lupo, I think, has had a week to listen to everybody. I know that myself, I've talked to him about it, and I've asked him about that possibility. But really, that's ultimately up to him, and I think that the inquiry has to go to Mr. Lupo in this case, and that's the rules and the laws that we're bound by, Mr. McCleary. So if you want to have a dialogue with our city, I don't know if you've talked to Mr. Lupo, I have no idea, but whether you have or you haven't, but that would be the person that I would think you would want to talk to at this point, which is what I think the point of the discussion should be, because I think it's the only way to resolve or get to the bottom of what you're trying to do here.
Mr. Mayor, I have reason to believe that Mr. Lupo has broken Florida state laws with respect to whistleblower, and I am going to propose a motion for the dismissal of Mr. Lupo as city manager.
Okay,
Now, shall we put this on an agenda item so I can then go through the reasons for such?
That may be a possibility, but before we do that, I want to know, I don't know the procedure. I'm fairly new, and I have to admit that I don't know the procedure for going into whether or not we're going to question the city manager, and if we do and we lose confidence, and that's the route that you want to go, and you want to have a discussion, I wanted to direct that to the city attorney to see the procedure for that, so we at least know what we're dealing with.
Put it on.
Is that okay, Mr. McCleary?
here's my concerns. I have had statements made to me by multiple city employees throughout. Apparently no one can hear me. Can everyone hear me at this point? Because no one can hear me on YouTube.
I can hear you.
Yeah, we can hear you loud and clear here.
Jim Matthew,
Okay.
Jim Matthew, I can hear you.
Okay. I have very grave concerns because I've received multiple reports of the reason for Chief DeCanio's firing is to cover up possible public safety violations by certain members of council. Therefore, that falls directly under the whistleblower statute of the state of Florida, and I'm trying to avoid legal repercussions for this city. Now, I understand Mr. Lupo has the quote-unquote authority to dismiss, but first of all, the dismissal was forced once he was brought information that of a potential violation of public safety. He was then terminated because of it. So that is now a violation of state law. Council, because it is a violation of state law, has the right to terminate Mr. Lupo and reverse any actions of Mr. Lupo that protect this city.
I understand that, but I'm telling you, I think there's a specific procedure for that. I don't know specifically what it is. I'm not familiar with the statute. I wasn't anticipating this.
Problem is,
But-
Mr. DeCanio, or Chief DeCanio, is retiring on May 1st, or forced retiring on May 1st. If we push this beyond the May 1st deadline, we have in fact committed a crime
Well,
or a violation of state law. Let me rephrase that, a violation of state law. So I ask this to our attorney and to our council: do we want to proceed and possibly expose this city to litigation because of a decision that, from all of the statements and everything I have seen, is not in the best interest of the city and violating state law? Is that the decision that we are choosing to make at this time?
well, I think you got to go around and poll the council, but I think before you do that, what you originally were talking about is making a motion that had to deal with our city manager. I was asking to get a legal ruling on the procedure to do that, so we know where we stand first, and then we'll
The
address that
problem
issue.
is, what is happening is you're putting the legal review of the city manager over the retirement or the forced retirement of the chief of police by the city manager. So by pushing this off another week, another 2 weeks, or whatever, I guess Mr. Matthews designates as the time and the procedure for doing such, although according to the charter and the removal of a city manager, a city councilman may make a motion at any time for the removal of city manager with reasons. And as long as it is approved by a majority of city council, then he is immediately suspended, and he has 15 days for which to submit a written reply to the charge, and then he has to have a hearing within 10 days. So I know exactly what the procedure is. So we can actually submit this procedure and review the removal of Mr. Vincent Lupo right now for several reasons, which I can get into if I'm allowed to speak.
Well, what we're going to do is, the one person that probably hasn't spoken about this is Mr. Kinsella. Mr. Kinsella, Councilman Kinsella, do you want to weigh in, or what's your position on this?
Well, one part where I do agree with Councilman McLary is, again, our transparency that we've been trying to move forward with from less than a year ago when we were suddenly thrown into a dissolution of the city. And one of the things Mr. Lupo and everyone else on the council have said, you know, the transparency we need to win the support back of our citizens. And I thought we were moving in that direction. My 2 cents on this: I don't like this removal. I'll be perfectly honest with you. I don't like the way it was handled. My personal experience in my profession, honestly, this truly stinks. I don't like it, and one of the things I would ask Mr. Lupo, especially because of the state that we are in, that again, talking to Chief DeCanio, he agreed that he'll leave, but in a few months, if we have that opportunity, let's work through what we need to and allow him to leave on those terms, but at the same time, get us over this crisis that this entire world is in, our city's in, and let's go ahead and do some healing and then move forward and continue on with our city. But Mr. Lupo, I do ask, and not only am I asking, you know, I'm going to really beg of you to reconsider that and allow our chief to remain a few more months over this transition and the healing process instead of throwing us in this turmoil. That's exactly what is happening. My phone has never rang off the hook because of this, because of all the unanswered questions, and I got plenty of them too. And so, like I said, I'm asking that reconsideration just to get us over the process and you know, the mess that we're in, and then eventually let's move forward, but do it without the turmoil that we're in now.
Thank you. I wanted to go back to Councilman, or actually Vice Mayor Dittmer, to weigh in on this particular issue. If any comments, are you still on the line? We're going to check with that. Councilwoman Sorrell, are you still there as well?
Yes, I am there.
Okay, and I have the
All right.
and I have the same stance that you have, that whether or not I agree with what happened isn't really the issue. The issue is it's outside of our purview to really tell the city manager.
I fail to see how someone who is responsible and reports to city council is outside of our purview. Under the rules of the charter, and it's very clear that the city manager reports and has responsibility to city council. Once you have that, we are essentially his boss. And to say that someone, a city manager or whomever, does not have to report or have any responsibility to his boss, and the boss cannot make decisions with respect to the city manager, is absolutely incomprehensible to me.
Right, Mr. McCleary, but I'm suggesting that that's still what the charter says, and it's pretty clear. We've asked for a legal ruling. So really the ball is in Mr. Lupo's court, and you know, I think whatever decision he makes, you know, we have to move on from there. I think that's where we're at.
I find it very interesting, that's all.
Okay. I wanted to pass it back over to Mr. Lupo for any comment.
Rather interesting.
No, something happened.
Yeah.
Okay.
He's coming back in. He lost his connection. He's coming. He's trying to. I think he lost his connection.
Can you hear me? Jocelyn?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, I'm back. Dropped the internet connection.
No, that's okay. We were passing it back over to you. We were in the discussion, and really we're at a juncture where it appears that our city attorney has said that the sole province and decision for all employees is going to rest with Mr. Lupo.
Actually, that's not accurate either. According to the charter, the individual departments are under the department heads, and the department heads are under Mr. Lupo.
Okay. So,
So I am also going to talk about one of the departments that was under the jurisdiction of Chief DeCanio as well.
okay, but what I wanted to do is turn to Mr. Dittmer and ask Mr. Dittmer, or Vice Mayor Dittmer, if this is a discussion that we want to have in terms of continuing to, I guess, ask basically Mr. Lupo to reverse his position, and or what your position is at this time.
Again, I'd like to think that Todd makes a lot of arguments for it, and I also understand Jenny's position as well. The way I've looked at it and the way I've been told, because I've asked for feedback regarding this situation, and I was told that it could be deemed as interference. So I also look at it, everybody keeps saying that Chief was removed, but as far as I know, he's resigned. So that's,
Well, Mr. Dittmer, didn't you read the chief's statement?
Mr. McCleary, please recognize the floor appropriately.
No one recognizes the floor for recognized the floor for me, so why should I recognize the floor for anyone?
Please, let's keep order in the
Well,
meeting.
obviously.
If we can keep order in the meeting, I think it was Mr. Vice Mayor Dittmer that was speaking, and then I think Jenny Sorrell had the floor next, and she was making a comment, and then it'll go back to Mr. McCleary, depending on what's being said here.
all right. Well, where I was in this fact, I did read the letter. I also feel that the chief, who's been a police officer in New York, is a tough guy. I think that he makes his own decisions. I think if he felt that he was being wronged, he would have stepped forward and said so. I think there may be an issue between the two of them. I don't know, because we're not supposed to be involved in that situation. But I also think that the chief is not asking us, as far as I know, to help him with this. I think
Well, let's unmute the chief right now and ask him.
Well, this
Chief unmuted?
right now, this is a discussion amongst the council, but
Well,
what we,
no. We'll just ask the question. So let's ask the question of the chief.
but I don't know if we're there yet, because before we ask that question, it's irrelevant unless Mr. Lupo is suggesting that he's amenable to this, and we're not quite there yet. So let's.
Other than Will asking the question, we're not there?
Correct, because let's presume.
Okay, that makes sense.
Well, let's presume that Mr. DeCanio or Chief DeCanio wants to withdraw his resignation. That's ultimately up to our city manager to accept or not accept. So before we go there,
No, that wasn't the question. The question that Will had is, does Chief DeCanio want council's help? That was the question. And that's the question.
Has he asked us for
He's
help?
he's personally asked me for help, yes. And that's why I'm involved in this.
And by doing such and helping, again, I go back to the attorney on this, is that interfering with the daily operation? That's my concerns here,
Okay.
guys. That's
we're going to turn
where
it over to our city attorney at this time to comment.
Everybody hear me? I can read the charter section, but I don't think that's appropriate. I am very sure and confident that the city manager under our council manager form of government, which is routine in all council manager forms of government, has the sole purview to hire, fire department heads. Okay, I'm not gonna, we've known that in this city for a long time. Also,
Yeah, that worked in 2003 as well.
Point of order, Mr. Mayor, would you ask Mr. McCleary to quit interrupting?
Yes, ma'am. I wanted our city attorney to finish commenting because I think he knows more about this than anybody here.
yeah, so with regard to interfering, from the charter, neither the council nor any member shall interfere with the conduct of any department officer or an employee in the discharge of her duty. And that would include the city manager. I'm not the arbiter of what interference is, and I'm not going to make a call whether we're interfering or not. that's not my job. I mean, especially when there's a disagreement among council members, what interference is. I can tell you that the interference is not a legal term. It has its common plain meaning. So is it interference or not? That's up to you five to decide. Okay, and you take a vote here today. But the point is that the city manager has sole ability to hire, fire, accept resignations for the retirement, and that's a fact.
Okay. All right. So knowing that, I think the inquiry is going to go to Mr. Lupo at this time. And I think Mr. Lupo has to tell us what his position is in terms of the resignation of Chief DeCanio.
Council, with respect to Chief DeCanio, Chief DeCanio and I, over the years, have had differences. We've had discussions. And on the 8th or 9th of April, Chief DeCanio came into my office to discuss some issues. And we discussed many issues. And we came to what I believe was a meeting of the minds at that point in time. We discussed those issues. I asked Chief DeCanio to go back and discuss the issues with his wife, and to come back and rediscuss the issues. At that point in time, again, this was back on the 8th or 9th of April, when we met and talked again, we talked about a letter from him for the 15th, so that I could brief council at a then scheduled 20th meeting. And we talked about 3 weeks, approximately 3 weeks, as a date to coincide with the pay periods and May 1st. Chief DeCanio and I had discussions with regard to that. And I accepted what he told me, and I believe he accepted what I had told him. We worked out the date. He went back. He worked out his letter of retirement, and I accepted that letter of retirement. And despite some of the information, if you can call it that, from a former disgruntled employee who accuses me of foul language, who accuses me of yelling and screaming, and alluding to unimaginable issues, that I hate dogs, that I made accusations about him, unbelievable to me. His discussion was after he had met with his chief of police. But that being set aside, there were quite a few issues that Jerry and I discussed, and we came to a gentleman's agreement. And that agreement that he was submitting his letter of retirement. His letter of retirement was self-explanatory, and I accepted it. I have accepted other letters of retirement. Other people had, if you will call it, buyer's remorse, and I did not accept a change in their retirement status. It has been said that this is a critical issue, but and as I've stated previously, the police department is a paramilitary organization designed so that its leadership can go up and down depending upon who was and who was not there. Critical issues, Chief DeCanio and Captain Koch have been on and off each day, one off, one on, one off, one on. So there is no critical issue with respect to service to the public. Our police department works admirably well, with or without one individual being on target. Chief DeCanio knew what our discussion was. He knew what our agreements were, and I am going to hold to that and not entertain a move from Mr. DeCanio's retirement position. And I believe it is entirely in my purview with respect to this issue. I don't know of any whistleblower nonsense that's being foisted.
Well, if others were
I
able to
don't
speak,
know.
then maybe you would.
Sir, I am
Mr.
speaking,
McCleary,
please.
allow him to finish, please.
I don't know of any whistleblower nonsense that's supposedly out there. Well, that's, you know, I specifically asked in writing because of requests from the Tampa Bay Times of Chief DeCanio if there was any investigation concerning Mayor Scott Tremblay, and he in writing came back and said there is no investigation concerning concerning the mayor. So I don't know about this whistleblower issues out there, and that's a simple matter of fact. So Chief DeCanio and I came to an agreement, and I am holding to that agreement. I'm not changing, sir.
Can I speak now, or will I be silenced?
You can speak back.
I find it astounding that Mr. Lupo was allowed to give a 10-minute explanation of his side of the events, and you won't even allow Chief DeCanio to speak to his side of the events, nor will you allow any of the evidence that I have, or not evidence, excuse me, statements that I have received completely debunking what Mr. Lupo has just said. You will allow none of that to be entered in and discussed about. I find that astounding. In fact, it seems almost unanimous that no one wants the truth of what Jerry DeCanio feels or what his side of the events are. Yet Mr. Lupo can speak for 10 minutes on end and say what he said with Mr. DeCanio and how they came to an agreement, which is, quite honestly, misleading counsel and misleading the public, according to what I have found. In addition, Mr. Lupo spoke for 10 minutes about Patrick Alou, who retired with 2 weeks' notice. And all of a sudden, why would someone who retired from an agency become a disgruntled employee? Well, maybe they were fired. Now, in context to, debunk the discussion of there is no issues of whistleblower or anything of that nature, without stating the evidence and hearing what everything I've found, how do you even know that? So you're assuming at the end that there's nothing to hide because I said so, when I have statements from employees across multiple departments stating otherwise.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
where is these statements? Where are these proof? I want to see them. I've got nothing but a letter from an employee who retired and has left the city, no longer employed in the city. I have no statement from Mr. DeCanio that says that he was forced to retire. You're using words like forced and fired, and I have not seen that in any of the letters or comments or statements that I have.
Did you not read Chief DeCanio's statement?
If I may weigh in.
Yes, I did read Chief DeCanio's statement. There is nothing about being forced in that statement.
If I may weigh in.
It sounds to me like he's an adult and he was fully capable of making his decisions on his own.
Well, let's ask him right now.
Fine.
Mute him
Let's
and ask
put him on the phone.
He is on the phone. Let's unmute him. Chief DeCanio, are you on the line?
I don't know if he is.
Chief DeCanio, are you on the line?
Okay. Well, the question becomes, does the council want to inquire about where Mr. DeCanio's position or statement is? It sounds like Mr. McCleary wants a statement. It sounds like Councilwoman Sorrell says she does not think it's necessary to take a statement in light of what Mr. Lupo said, if I'm understanding correctly. And I think Mr. Dittmer's position was that this sounds like or feels like it could be interference with what his position is under our charter or statute. Is that correct so far? So let's take, I guess, a vote without getting into detail. Ms. Sorrell, what's your position? Do you want to put Mr. DeCanio on the line to go through this?
Let's hear what Mr. Canio has to say. Apparently, Mr. McCleary is not going to be satisfied until he speaks. But I'm
Okay.
not going to accept any kind of thing that if he can't prove that he has been forced to do anything.
Okay. So we're putting Mr. DeCanio on the line to talk about his discussion with Mr. Lupo in reference to the resignation letter. Is that the purview of why we're putting our chief on the line? By consensus, is that what we're doing here? Okay. So what I'd like to do is pose the question to our Chief DeCanio.
Jerry?
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can, yes.
Okay, go ahead.
Jerry, how are you doing this evening?
Okay, I'm doing well.
Excellent. I wanted to put you on. The council had some inquiries for you, and I wanted to know if you were in a position or willing to talk about them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. The first one, which I think is the most important one, is I think at some point we all received information that there was a retirement date set for you that was scheduled for the end of this week, which is Friday. Is that kind of correct?
Yes.
Okay. And I think the council, or some of the council members, wanted to know, I guess, a couple things. The first one they wanted to know is what your discussion, I guess, with Mr. Lupo was in reference to the retirement letter.
Well, Mr. Mayor, how far back can I go? Because there's a circumstance that leads up to this discussion of retirement. It's got to do with you, if that's okay, if you don't mind me going back a little bit.
No, that's okay. I've read everything, and you're welcome to say what the discussion is.
Well, absolutely, I appreciate that. The conversation that Mr. Lupo and I, where it started this retirement discussion, was he indicated to me that there was some sort of sting regarding you driving your utility vehicle. And when I asked him where did he get that from, I said, let me know who said these things so that I can hold whoever said them accountable. The conversation turned right away to when did I intend to retire. Now, I'm sure you've all heard me talk about retirement someday. In fact, in 1981, when I joined the New York City Police Department, we talked about retirement, and my neighbors and family say, when are you going to retire, when are you going to retire? With the onset of the COVID-19 and the CAD system that has to be completed and the vehicles that have to be completed, I want the council and the public to know that I would never have turned my back on this city and walked out in 2 weeks. It just doesn't make sense. I've received some phone calls from residents, and I've received some phone calls from council members that have said, it's kind of odd, why are you leaving in 2 weeks in the middle of a pandemic? Now, Mr. Lupo and I discussed some dates, and I had said, let's go 3 months out. I could help him with a transition for a chief and finish up these projects, and maybe the pandemic would start to wind down. And the date of May 1st was chosen for me. That's not the date that I chose.
Okay. And thank you for that input. I know that's what the council wanted to ask you. Is that pretty much what you wanted, or what the consensus was to ask him? Okay. So I wanted to thank you for your valuable information and insight into this. And should either the council, which I don't think we have the authority to, but should some decision be made, and that would be by Mr. Lupo, to change your retirement date, would you have an objection to that?
Absolutely not. We could discuss another date. We can get some projects done. And that was the offer that I made 2 weeks ago.
Okay. So thank you. I think that's what Councilman McCleary, those are the issues that he wanted to ask you. Is that correct, Mr. McCleary?
Well, it goes a little bit beyond that, as there seems to be a reason for Chief DeCanio to be forced out or have the date selected for him for his retirement that I believe that the citizens should be well aware of, and I would like his statement that I submitted to council entered into the meeting minutes.
You're talking about just his letter?
His letter, yes, his statement, yes.
One of the things I'd like to note is that statement, I think, was generated and given to you and then passed along to council today. I think normally there's a procedure, which you'd put it in a week before that for review. That having been said,
No, if someone hands out a document in any meeting, it goes into the meeting minutes for the following meeting.
yeah, but normally if it's a council person, you do it with a little bit of notice. That having been said, let me see if I can find this particular document that you're looking for. All right. And I don't have the document. You'd have to pass it to Sal, generally speaking. Does the
I
council...
did include Sal on the email this morning
Okay.
at 9 a.m.
Okay.
for inclusion into the meeting minutes.
Does the council have any opposition to putting in just Chief DeCanio's statement that he's just, I guess, testified to at this point?
No.
I don't have a problem. I think it should.
All right, so we'll accept his statement, and we're speaking to his statement only, I believe, is what you're
Well, it
referring
would
to.
also include the supporting documentation of his statement.
Do you guys...
His statement in its totality, please.
Well, his statement's been entered, and I don't think there's a problem with that.
Yeah, and he included several attachments, which should also be entered.
Those attachments are other people's statements, sir.
So the totality of his statement is not, you are objecting to the totality of his statement being entered into meeting minutes, including the supporting documentation and emails. Is that your position?
Well, what are you referring to? There's a statement by another police officer. There's a statement by Patrick Alou. Those weren't his statements. Those were other people's statements.
No, actually, the statement from the police officer was included as part of his statement and his submission in the report.
I don't see it that way.
What's that? I don't know whether that's proper or not because he's not here, but his statement I don't have an issue with. What about the rest of the council? Does the council have a problem with putting all these documents in?
I don't have a problem.
I don't have a problem.
Okay, so accepted in its totality.
Excuse me,
What's that?
I do have a problem. I want the letter that is only the first 2 pages of DeCanio. The rest of it is nothing.
So it's your position the rest of the attachments were irrelevant to what we're talking about?
Exactly.
What's your, Mr. Dittmer, do you have an opinion on that?
No, I don't. I think that we need to sit back a little bit and review all these things. We got a lot of stuff being thrown at us, including whistleblower statutes, which I, be honest with you, don't know anything about how that works. So I think we just need to step back and take some time to review all of this.
Well, if I was allowed to speak before cut off, I could explain how the whistleblower statute was violated, but obviously we don't want to hear the entirety of my discussion points. So I guess we will all review the whistleblower statute and then come back at a later date.
That's fine. With that, does that conclude, I guess, the discussion on this particular issue?
Considering, my entire presentation and the statements that I've received are refused to be let into council and discussed, there is very little more I can speak to other than Chief Jerry DeCanio has already admitted that he did not want to retire effective May 1st. He was effectively pushed out by Mr. Lupo for reasons that we are refusing to talk about. and then we let Mr. Lupo defend himself for 10 minutes as to his decision-making process, and then we're going to defer it until a later time.
Mr. McCleary, I have not seen the proof that you are talking about.
Other than the letter from Chief DeCanio, a signed letter from Chief DeCanio, a signed statement from Sergeant Patrick Alou, who appears to be forced to have retired, and you won't let me talk about all the other anonymous people who have talked to me and discussed things, and for fear of retribution and intimidation, refuse to have their names put out, but they're trying to have a voice. Other than that, and you won't act unless they have a signed statement putting their name on the page and the target on their back, you refuse to listen to it.
I had nothing to do with that.
If you can't stand up for what you are saying, then your information is useless.
And if you were scared for your job, you would be doing the same thing.
I have told everybody in this city that if somebody has something to say that is worthwhile that they can prove, then I will take it to the Supreme Court if I have to. But, you know, I'm not going to go and do anything to anyone on hearsay. Chief DeCanio wrote a letter to resign as of May 1st. He has not written a letter that says he wants to renege on that.
Now we need a letter. Just him saying he wants to push isn't enough.
You are interrupting again, Mr. McCleary. That's why you are feeling like you're not being able to say what you want to. You are interrupting everyone when they're taking thought. I have the floor, sir, so you be quiet.
No, I never relinquished the floor. Somehow it just got taken away from me. So.
Well, I think that we've discussed the issues. It sounds like at this time it looks like the discussion looks like it's drawn to an end. What I'd like to do is move on to the next item for council business. Does anyone have opposition to moving on to item 3 on our council business agenda? Hearing no objections, I'm going to move on to the update on the city's local government investment portfolio, and I'm going to pass that over to Mr. Lupo and then later for presentation.
Jocelyn, would you please? Would you please present it?
You're gonna present it.
Pardon me?
He's gonna present it, Andrew. Andrew, can you hear me?
Yeah, Andrew's going to do it.
I can hear you if you can hear me.
Yes.
All right, Andrew, you're on.
I'm available to present when you're ready.
Please, Andrew, would you please present your findings to this council?
Okay, is that my cue?
Yes, sir.
All right, good evening, Council. Andrew Laughlin here, Finance Director. Going to give you a brief presentation overview of the investments, investment strategy, and investment results of the city for the 6 months ended March 31st, 2020. The investment policy, in fact, that was adopted, that went to you all for approval back in the summer of 2019, did include reporting requirement that we would provide reporting to you all every 6 months. Would have loved to have done that in person at a council meeting, but due to the pandemic, this virtual meeting is what we'll have to go with. So I just want to spend the next few minutes to just give you some facts about the composition of the city's investments and its performance. And again, we're talking about for the 6 months ended, we'll say for the six months and 2 weeks ended 3/31/20. So in late August of 2020, the city invested $2.5 million in two different investment pools, local investment pools, Florida Fit and Florida Class. Subsequently, in March, the city liquidated assets it had in a savings account with our bank, and that was to the tune of $750,000 each, so $1.5 million total, and put that in Florida Fit and Florida Class as well. So the total amount that the city has invested in these two government investment pools are 3.25 million each, 6.5 million total. The balance in these two funds, as interest is earned in these investment pools, they're reinvested in the pools. Total balance is $6,561,283. So in that 6 months change period, the city has earned $61,283. Currently, as of 3/31, the 30-day yield of each of these investment pools in Florida Fit is 1.49%, Florida Class is 1.44%. When the city initiated these investment transactions back in late August, those pools were running at about 2.37% for Florida Fit and 2.30% for Florida Class. Maybe somebody needs to mute. And then each month, those that 30-day yield has gone down each month and now we're from roughly 2.3 to 1.5%. I'm no economist, so I can't predict what the future will hold. We've had good earnings initially in the low 2% range, and that is going down, and the future is uncertain. What I can tell you is that we will continue to monitor what the yields are. We would explore other options if they present if they're more lucrative to the city. For example, look at potentially bank products like money market or a longer-term CD, non-negotiable CD, if we find that the yield is higher in that investment. But right now we're holding firm. The great thing about these two investment pools is they're fully liquid, so we can pull money out at any time, and they're low risk. Their concentration is primarily in commercial paper, with some in CDs, some in U.S. Treasury, and some in money markets. So it's low risk, low yield investments that comprise these portfolios of these two investment pools. They're largely invested in the same types. The concentrations are just a little bit different. And currently, Florida Fit is performing slightly better than Florida Class, but they're both very close. Any questions you all have, I'm happy to address them now.
If I can open on this particular issue, my biggest concern is with the pandemic. Obviously, there's going to be a direct economic impact, which is going to probably affect investments as much as everything else. What is your opinion in terms of how that's going to affect our investments and whether or not we should change the course in which we're doing with our money, whether we should not invest it at this point, put it in savings? Do you have an opinion about that issue?
Sure. Like I said, these are not higher risk investments where there's no alternatives. Like I said, in both portfolios, Florida Class is roughly almost 70% in commercial paper. So those are short-term U.S. corporate borrowings. Next highest is money market funds, CDs, kind of next. So we're not talking high risk, but yes, as interest rates fall, the cost of borrowing falls. The value of U.S. Treasuries fall. We will see declines in the value of these investment pools.
Is it still more lucrative, though, than if we just put it in a regular savings account, I guess is the question?
Well, sure. Good question. And like I stated previously, we want to continue to monitor that. So we have, in our current relationship with our existing financial institution, PNC Bank, we can periodically request quotes for money market, what they're offering in money market funds, as well as CDs of varying durations. The only concern with a non-negotiable CD is you're locking your money in, for whatever duration, 6 months, 12 months, 18 months. The longer the duration, the better the yield, but less liquidity. And yet you could potentially pull your money earlier, but you run into termination fees and penalties. So that's the beauty of these investment pools. There's diversification within the portfolio, and it's completely liquid and pull your money out any time. But Mr. Mayor, to your point, we want to keep all options open and continually watch the market, watch what our returns are in these investments relative to what we could get with bank products.
And the other question is, I guess this goes for the council. One of the concerns I have is the instability of, I think, our economy right now. Is this something that we can monitor every 2 weeks just for a report, even if it's not a lengthy one?
If I heard your question correctly, it was monitor our current rates of return every couple weeks.
Right.
Sure. I mean, we get monthly statements, and so that's probably on a monthly basis might make the most sense, just to see where the month over month's change in that 30-day yield. I think that's the best barometer of measurement, and we can certainly look at that compared to what other short-term investment offerings may be out there. Just keep all options open and demonstrate that we're looking at that. So if it's monthly analysis that you might want to see, I'd be happy to provide.
Okay. Anyone on the council have any questions or comments at this point?
I do.
Okay.
Andrew, I was just wondering, I know it's not like stocks and everything like that, but is there, would we put basically a stop limit? When would we get to a point where we would say we definitely need to move funds? Do we have a set number for that?
Well, it's at our discretion in terms of the regulations surrounding our current investments. I think it's same-day liquidity. You have to get your request in by a certain time, otherwise it's next day. But if we wanted to pull all 6 million out and put it in a savings account, we would have the liberty of doing so. I mean, but no, our interest rate right now is at like I mentioned, 1.44 to 1.49%. We pulled money out of the savings account we have at PNC Bank because that was earning 90 basis points.
Those returns are better than we can put it in currently. That's why I was asking about a stop limit. Is there a point that we get where we reevaluate and say it's time to bail on that?
It would just be continually observing, and so looking at each monthly statement, looking what our return is, and staying in touch with our relationship manager at PNC Bank just to keep honest and see what they would be quoting for CDs and money markets and other alternatives, because ultimately preservation of capital is paramount, so we don't want to invest in anything higher risk. And our portfolio at 6.5 million is a little too low for a more sophisticated managed portfolio option, where we don't want to hire an investment manager to pick and choose and corporate bonds and treasuries and agency securities. Generally, you see that more in the at least tens of millions or hundreds of millions dollar range for local governments to have a managed portfolio. So this is our sweet spot. Either pick bank products or local government investment pool, or just sit on operating account. So I think we're doing the right thing now, but like I said, we'll continue to monitor that in the future.
Okay, thank you.
At this time, were there any other comments or questions I wanted to see?
I don't know.
I can see Mr. Kinsella shaking his head no. I can't see everybody else. Councilwoman Sorrell, do you have any questions or comments?
No, I do not.
Okay.
I'll just end on a high note. For the last 6 months, the city has earned over $60,000 of interest, and that's definitely been a market improvement over previous years, and we're just halfway into fiscal year 20. So we're doing the right things. It's not going to be that way, at least in the foreseeable future, but we're not losing money, we're making money, and we've done well in the last 6 months and change.
And I'm grateful for all your hard work. It's nice to see the city thrive financially as well. Mr. McCleary, did you have any comments?
No, I have nothing.
Okay. Any other questions for our budget analyst? Or analyst? No? With that, I wanted to thank you, Andrew, for your participation. And we'll look forward to working with you here in the near future to get an update.
Yeah, absolutely. Looking forward to seeing everybody again, hopefully in the not too distant future.
Yes, sir. Thank you. With that, I think that concludes council business on item 3. I'd like to move on to item 4, which is a SNAP grant. And I was going to pass that to Mr. Lupo for introduction.
The SNAP grant is the Edward Byrne Memorial Justice Assistance Grant Program. At issue for City Council, as you will recall, the city has been the recipient of the JAG funding for several years. JAG funds may be used to provide additional personnel, equipment, supplies, contract support, training, technical assistance, and the information system for criminal justice for board development and adoption, and activities related to the improvement of the criminal justice apparatus. Action requested of council to approve the funding allocation of $120,025 from the Edward Byrne Memorial Justice Grant Program to Pasco County.
Are there any motions or discussion?
I'd like to make a motion to approve this allocation from the Edward Byrne Memorial Justice Grant Program to Pasco County.
Thank you. Can I hear a second?
I'll second the motion.
Thank you. Does it merit any discussion?
I do have a question.
Okay.
Do we know exactly what we are getting out of this, what Pasco County?
No, sir, not yet. Not at this time.
We've got about 14,000 last year. What was the number? I just happen to know that. It's a number like that.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed?
Aye.
Hearing no opposition, motion passes. At this time, I wanted to move on to old business, as that concludes council business. For old business, I'd like to start with Vice Mayor Dittmer, if there's any old business.
I do have a couple here. I want to follow up with FDOT regarding that right-hand turn on Cody Avenue, what our status is on that. And the second thing is not really old business, but we had a visitor to the city in a big RV over by my house, and actually pulled into one of the driveways and ended up with one of the overhead TV cables and for the whole city hooked on his RV. I wanted to thank our utilities department, Sean especially, for coming out and helping them get untangled from that, because that could have been a disaster for everybody's phone and internet lines.
To the issue of the traffic control device, I think we were looking to change your ad. I wanted to pass that to Mr. Lupo for a moment.
Yes, we'll get a report and I'll get back with council at the next council meeting.
And that's regarding the FDOT?
I didn't understand.
The FDOT report, that's what he's asking you.
Yes, I'll try and get with FDOT to come back and get the information for you, sir. We haven't received anything from FDOT at this point in time that I'm aware of.
Okay, thank you.
At this time, I want to go on to, is that all you have, Mr. Dittmer?
Yes, it was.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to move on to Councilman Todd McClary for any old business that we can address.
I have none.
Okay, thank you. Councilwoman Sorrell?
I have none, thank you.
Okay, and I don't have any old business to come before council.
I do. I just have something to bring up. The traffic flow there at Treadway.
Yes.
We put the city put down the markings for the sidewalk. Is there anything else that we're going to do when you turn off Old Post onto Treadway? You see a line, but there's nothing else defining that. And I've seen in other areas, US 19 turn lanes, they have barriers, markers to, for those. I'm wondering if that's something that we would do as well.
I will get with our Public Works Department and our traffic consultant and see what we can do, sir.
Okay, thank you. That seems like all the old business. Any motions to adjourn?
I make a motion to adjourn.
Thank you.
Would you please remind council if they have to reconvene as CRA?
5-minute break to go change.
Okay. And for the council, we're going to be adjourned. What I was asking everybody to do is to hold on the line. We have a secondary meeting tonight that deals with our CRA funding, and we have an item to deal with there. Can you guys hold on for 5 minutes?
Do they stay on the line, stay on the same line?
Okay.
We still need a second to adjourn the meeting.
Can we have a second to adjourn the original meeting?
Would you like the motion to adjourn? I'll second. You need a second. Second out there? You don't need a second on a motion, by the way. It's the only motion that doesn't require a second. It's the motion to adjourn.
So we're going to say all in favor, aye. And we're going to come back in 5 minutes on our CRA funding meeting.